Hello and welcome to Nozindaba. My name is Tateli.
And I am Nonoza. This is a Nozindaba history special.
One-party state. The dissident party and its dissident father are both destined not only for rejection, but for utter destruction as well.
Tonight we are highlighting a sad and tragic chapter in our history, the so-called Entebbe disturbances of November 1980 and February 1981, during which President Robert Mugabe's then guerrilla army, ZANLA, fought that of his nationalist rival Joshua Nkomo's ZIPRA, are typically cited as among the more important precursors of the Gukurahundi massacres of 1983-4.
The late Vice President Joshua Nkomo sought a political solution to post-independence ZANLA-ZIPRA conflict, while President Robert Mugabe preferred military confrontation.
Mr. Mugabe's notorious 5th Brigade has only been filmed once at this passing out parade in 1983. It's exclusively Shona speaking, unquestionably loyal to the Prime Minister, and has been trained by instructors from North Korea. In spite of the language difficulties, the Prime Minister has obviously been impressed by the North Koreans. He went to North Korea on one of his first official foreign visits after independence and witnessed many displays of highly organized dedication to the party.
I would like to pay tribute to our comrades in arms, the instructors from the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, who, with the assistance of instructors from our own Zimbabwe National Army, have brought the men under their command to such a high standard.
2 years ago, when this particular film was shot, the 5th Brigade moved into Matabeleland and began a reign of terror. As the elections approach, they've been ordered back again.
And so they were, but not in the way Mugabe and others would have us believe. The fighting did not constitute a bald and unprovoked coup attempt by Nkomo, the first of a series of seditious acts that forced ZANU-PF to react belatedly and violently in early 1983. It was, in fact, Mugabe, not Nkomo, who deliberately brought Zimbabwe to the brink of civil war within a year of independence. What prompted the Gukurahundi, during which thousands of Ndebele-speaking civilians were murdered by Mugabe's North Korean-trained soldiers? There is a persistent view in some circles that the killings, while horrific or regrettable, were a response to a complex and escalating array of existential threats to the state. The basis of this position is that the Mugabe government was fundamentally defensive in the early years of independence, faced with a multitude of foes who remained strong after a negotiated end to the Rhodesian Civil War. The regime was obliged to be cautious and reactive in the 1980s. Nothing could be further from the truth.
For the many who regard Mugabe as the devil incarnate, evidence is barely necessary to convict him of every evil that has been visited on post-independence Zimbabwe, and the Gukurahundi is chief among them.
Matabeleland, near the town of Nkai. So the man's hands are tied behind his back?
Yes.
Tied with wire?
These are 2 hands, you see? 2 of his hands are still tied. Here is the hand.
Yeah. How many bodies do you think are buried here in this pit?
I can't chart at the moment, but seeing the pace of a big pit, over 50 bodies may be inside here.
And how were the bodies brought here?
They are just stuck in with the trees and so forth.
And when was this? Was this recently?
About 10 days.
10 days ago?
Yes.
And how were the bodies brought here?
These bodies are brought by some Land Rovers, maybe government trucks.
So you're saying Land Rovers using this old road through the bush?
The old crossroad road. Turn off and then they come and bury these people. Quite a lot of people are missing in the country, and they may have just found that maybe quite a lot of people, maybe more than 50 can be in here. I understand there is another pit which is of this diameter around this area.
Because there's been so much propaganda against the 1st Brigade, we'd very much like to see what they do.
Of course, no. You cannot film our operations. I mean, they cease to have any meaning at all if they are a matter for broadcasting or televising. These are operations we are conducting in secrecy, and naturally the information we get must not be exposed to the public at all.
The beatings, the killing, the torture is unbelievable, unbelievable. And these people will play it off. People are being taken daily at night and they disappear forever. And those who are taken to police camp, in the stops camp in Bulawayo, the torture that goes in there is to be seen, to be believed, and by the black people to another black man.
But others lay claim to a more nuanced approach. They are an otherwise incongruous assortment of regime critics and apologists. Yet in their attempts to explain the killings, they have this in common: all rely on an appeal to historical context and a supposedly superior grasp of events between 1980 and early 1983.
Context and an understanding of chronology are, of course, vitally important, but a closer look at this period shows that the purportedly more sophisticated viewpoint is almost as superficial as the one which is reflexively anti-Mugabe. Some have come to this alternative view because they know only half the story, though others, among them a few prominent perpetrators, are motivated by duplicity. President Emerson Mnangagwa is one of the second group. When Mugabe and ZANU-PF took office in April 1980, they were certainly faced with powerful enemies. That is incontestable, though the rub lies in Mugabe's handling of these threats and their progressive weakening over the first 2 years. Como and his party, ZAPU, had been ostensible allies of ZANU during the war. But the two were, in reality, bitter rivals, whose fractious and often violent relationship with ZANU went back to the 1960s. This antipathy was intensified by Nkomo's belief that the independence elections of February 1980 were stolen by ZANU, and by ZANU's conviction that Nkomo was a sore loser who would use his sizable army, ZIPRA, to mount a coup if an opportunity arose.
Then there were the Rhodesians, who had been shooting Mugabe's guerrillas in the field a matter of weeks beforehand, and who retained a yet more formidable security apparatus than ZIPRA. Behind the Rhodesians stood apartheid South Africa's military machine, which had actively assisted in the fight against the nationalists. Mugabe's approach to the white problem was to institute a policy of reconciliation, while atrophying Rhodesian strength through a process of military integration. In this, he was remarkably successful. Senior members of the Rhodesian security forces and intelligence service were persuaded to serve the ZANU-PF government, and, in the main, did so loyally.
Meanwhile, the Rhodesian officer corps and white infantry units were gutted by resignations. By the end of 1980, the Rhodesian military was finished as a unified fighting force. Mugabe's strategy for ZAPU and ZIPRA was different, diametrically so. Whereas it was reconciliation with the whites, there was an undeclared policy of provocation in place for Nkomo and his people. This has often been poorly understood, but previously unpublished documents show a clear pattern of deliberate incitement by ZANU during 1980. Examples are legion, and they began even before Independence Day in mid-April. Forming a government of national unity, Mugabe offered the presidency to Nkomo, a ceremonial position that both despised. After Nkomo refused, he was given the Home Affairs portfolio, which was stripped of some of its most important functions, including national intelligence. That was handed to Mnangagwa. Another humiliation was meted out on Independence Day. While Mugabe and foreign dignitaries enjoyed center stage, Nkomo, Father Zimbabwe, was consigned to the back benches, hidden from a rapturous crowd.
The goading continued unrelentingly in the new Zimbabwe. The ZANU rank and file, often in collusion with more senior leaders, embarked on a campaign of violence against the supporters of ZAPU and other black opposition parties. They were joined in this by members of ZANLA, ZANU's guerrilla army. A few days after the independence celebrations, Police Commissioner Peter Allam told the British that ZANU supporters had taken strong exception to T-shirts which carried the emblems of other parties, and said that the trouble, in the townships, was the worst it had been since the 1960s. The churn at grassroots did not abate over subsequent months. Mid-year, Allam reported that the internal security situation in the country, in many ways more difficult than it had been during the wartime given the number of incidents involving theft, abduction, and assault. 80% of those who had been jailed for these offenses were ZANLA personnel.
Allam also noted that a group of ZANU ministers, of whom Mnangagwa was apparently one, were gunning for Nkomo in cabinet and regularly tried to laugh him down. The British High Commissioner, Robin Byatt, reported to London that Mugabe had set himself, since the election, to reassure the white community, but that the cohesion of the precarious ZANU-ZAPU relationship had got worse since independence. Favorably disposed to Mugabe, Byatt was nevertheless forced to concede that this increasing tension and the fear and suspicion flickering across the main tribal division was caused by ZANU. He outlined a chain of events that included the inequitable division of ministerial portfolios and the witch hunt of ZAPU supporters by ZANU wild boys in the townships. The ZAPU and ZIPRA leadership had become apprehensive, as well as angry, and some began muttering about taking action if they were pushed too far. Byatt felt that Mugabe was anxious to defuse matters, not the first time he was to be duped by Zimbabwe's prime minister.
To the contrary, Mugabe was aware of the anger that was building among his foes and sought to fan it. His ministers began to accuse ZIPRA dissidents of engaging in well-coordinated bandit violence as part of a plan to overthrow the government. Against the backdrop of ZANLA's widespread violence and strenuous efforts by the ZIPRA hierarchy to discipline the relatively few errant cadres in their own ranks, this generated fury within ZAPU and ZIPRA. The British observed that there was dissatisfaction developing in ZAPU with Nkomo because of his general subservience to ZANU, and he came under growing pressure to resist ZANU aggression. In June, Nkomo met secretly with the South Africans to ascertain whether they would remain neutral in a military conflict between ZIPRA and ZANLA. He told them that he would like to see a peaceful solution to political differences in the country, but chances of that happening were slim. The military authorities of both ZIPRA and ZANLA were by no means satisfied with the current state of affairs, and could tell that the issue would be settled militarily either way. The politicians tasked with finding a peaceful solution to the differences were no longer interested in peace.
Time was to show that Nkomo toyed with the idea of military action on a number of occasions. But every time a showdown loomed, he sought a political resolution. Mugabe, on the other hand, took an altogether different approach. The goading intensified. State radio persistently eulogized ZANLA's contribution to the liberation struggle and denigrated ZIPRA's. And no meaningful attempt was made to rein in ZANLA's excesses, which increased as local government elections approached. In July, the police confided to diplomats that they had no control within 60 kilometers of ZANLA camps and that ZANLA now accounted for 85% of politically motivated violence. In his first visit to a ZANLA camp since independence, which had come in the wake of rampant violence at that locale, Mugabe told a closed meeting that his men should keep their powder dry for ZIPRA. ZAPU's anxieties about the atmosphere of impunity around ZANLA hit a new high in September when government announced that more than 15 guerrillas from both armies would be moved from rural cantonments into the capital, Salisbury, where they would be located side by side. A similar camp would be established at Entebbe in the country's second city, Bulawayo. Nkomo was deeply upset, telling a colleague that he found himself in an impossible situation.
ZAPU believed that ZANU was trying to translate ZANLA's dominance of the Shona-speaking rural areas into the towns, which until then had been a sphere of more open political contestation. There was also a sense that the decision was a military strategic move in preparation for a clash with ZIPRA. South African intelligence shows that Mugabe was, indeed, purposefully engineering a decisive military confrontation. In October, he told a member of the ZANU Central Committee, who was a covert South African source, that as far as a possible civil war in the country was concerned, his wish was for it to happen as soon as possible. Mugabe foresaw that war would break out before December. He wanted it to happen as soon as possible in order to put an end to the rumors once and for all, and also in order for Nkomo to be convincingly overthrown on a military level. After returning from a trip to North Korea where he signed a deal for the Koreans to train a pure ZANLA 5th Brigade of the Army, Mugabe repeated that he foresees civil war by December and that he would prefer to see that it does happen now and be over and done with. He also repeated that he wants to break the Matabeles' power once and for all. A fortnight later, ZANU-PF held a 2-day rally in Bulawayo that was calculated to provoke a violent reaction from ZIPRA.
From the venue to the individuals involved and the nature of their speeches, this was an incendiary operation. They got what they wanted. Fighting exploded in the Entebbe cantonment late on the second day, with 3-0 ZANLA and ZIPRA men engaging in a series of pitched battles over 24 hours. It was brought to an end when jet fighters of the former Rhodesian Air Force flew low over the combatants, threatening to unload a barrage of rockets and bombs. This, along with orders from Nkomo to Zipra, brought the country back from the brink of civil war. ZAPU's intelligence chief, Dumiso Debengwa, recalled that Nkomo told him, "At all costs, this cannot continue, please go and stop that fighting." For his part, Mugabe had planned to ramp up the conflict, having brought into extra battalions which had been waiting in position outside Entebbe when the fighting ended. Mugabe had not obtained the war he was looking for, but recognized that relations with ZAPU and Zipra were now so poor that he need only maintain the pressure to quickly manufacture another opportunity.
A farm owned by Nkomo was raided in November. 9 senior ZAPU officials were arrested a week later, and some of the most troublesome Zanla elements were sent to boost numbers at Entebbe. In the background, both Zanla and Zipra were stockpiling weapons. Debengwa had brought in a trainload of armaments from Zambia and diverted them to the main Zipra base in Matabeleland North. In a later interview, he remarked that we were preparing for the worst and said, "If anything happens, at least we have a base from which we can be able to start." Bayet cabled London in December, warning of a process of escalation which is becoming dangerous, and he was again compelled to conclude that ZANU bore primary responsibility for the situation. Much of recent actions which have been worrying ZANU-PF have been simply responses to ZANU-PF intimidation and threats.
The provocations continued early in the new year. In January 1981, Mugabe demoted Nkomo during a cabinet reshuffle, sparking a heated debate within ZAPU on how the party should respond. When fighting again broke out at Entebbe in February 1981, it was the Rhodesian units that proved decisive. Reflecting on events, the South Africans concluded that Mugabe seems to have deliberately pushed Zipra to the point of open revolt. This has provided the excuse to deploy loyal forces against Zipra to break their military strength. Zipra suffered heavy losses, particularly to their heavy armor, which provided them with a distinct advantage over Zanla, and any thoughts of fighting on were, again, curtailed by the Air Force, and by the efforts of Nkomo and Debengwa to have the men lay down arms.
The focus of Mugabe's attention during the first year of Zimbabwe's independence was to eliminate Zipra because ZAPU had to be disarmed before it could be taken apart politically. He had ticked that box by early 1981. This is part of a series on the Gukurahundi extracted from the Zimbabwe Independent exclusively published by Daily Maverick, and drawn from Stuart Doran's book Kingdom, Power, Glory, Mugabe, ZANU and the Quest for Supremacy, 1960 to 1987.
Doran is an Australian historian and the author of the book Kingdom, Power, Glory, Mugabe, ZANU and the Quest for Supremacy, 1960-87. Thanks for watching. Please share, like and subscribe.
The Minister of National Supplies, Enos Nkala, who is himself an Ndebele, though a member of Mugabe's ZANU party, was sent on a special visit to Matabeleland. His task to persuade the people here that they have no need to be afraid of government troops. Mugabe can also point to the fact that he has allotted 4 ministerial posts to ZAPU men in the national government in the post-independence spirit of reconciliation. Officially, tribalism is regarded as against the public interest and as undesirable as racism. To support the government's view, alleged dissidents captured by the security forces are themselves accused of having tribal motives. They are the ones who have rejected the idea of national reconciliation, and by turning to banditry, they must be treated as outlaws. Several government leaders, however, have gone further in their denunciation of the dissidents. They claim the rebels are actively supported by Mr. Nkomo's party, ZAPU. They say the troubles in Matabeleland are the direct responsibility of Nkomo. His men have taken up arms against the elected government because Nkomo failed to win the political power he always sought. The prisoners have little choice but to admit their guilt. We spoke to Minister Nkala about the dissident problem, and he was completely forthright about the action he favors to beat the rebels.
Well, if you liquidate ZAPU, then you have no problems for dissidents. ZAPU, most of the dissidents we have captured, those that have been killed, are ZAPU. They wear pins with Comrade Nkomo's picture, and written Father Zimbabwe.
Nkomo has always denied that he controls dissidents.
Mugabe knows that I'm not that type of man, and he wished I had done it. He wished that there was an attempt against him so that he would have taken authentic action against me. When he failed to do it, he organized dissidents in my name.
The fact that we have not arrested him is purely out of deference to him, that he's old, he has played that part in the past, in the revolution. We would have picked him a long time ago without any qualms.
But two of Nkomo's Zipra generals were arrested, Damiso Debengwa and Luka Masuku. They've been detained for 3 years.
We happen to know that they were responsible for this exercise in hiding these arms. Damiso Debengwa went to Zambia and persuaded the Zambians to send the arms to ZAPU, to Zipra, rather than to government.
But why haven't you brought this evidence against them in court?
We have, in court he will say, of course, that he never said any such thing. And you know the procedures, the English procedure requires that there should be that clear evidence before you can actually...
But if you can't prove that he's guilty, why do you still...
We can still prove with our own intelligence information that he is guilty, sufficiently guilty to be able to be detained.
Why don't you put him on in front of a court?
We have put him in detention for the same reason that you need the technicalities, the procedures that are require that evidence must be sufficiently substantial, clear, and must leave the judges in no doubt that the person has committed the acts.
In the last 3 years, the police have picked up more than 650 people, including 2 British subjects, who are all being held without charge. Most are supporters of Mr. Nkomo ZAPU.
Arms caches were discovered on Zipra ex-combatants' farms and were given as one of the reasons for the subsequent military crackdown. Another was increasing dissident activity, reportedly sponsored by the South African apartheid regime.
There were a whole lot of things that gone wrong, and then Nkomo was kicked out. He had been Minister of Home Affairs and so on. And after that there was quite a negative, very negative feeling towards ZAPU, and in particular towards people in Matabeleland who were felt to be supporting ZAPU.
ZAPU is irretrievably bent on its criminal path. I'm sure the majority of our people will agree with me when I say time has now come for us to show this evil party our teeth. We can bite, and we shall certainly bite.
ZAPU is innocent as much as I am. I've done everything to support our independence, right from the beginning to this day. And I get this now from Prime Minister Mugabe, sending young men to come and kill me and my family.
The situation is one which requires a change on the part of the people of Matabeleland. They must be reoriented. Nkomo has not accepted political defeat.
They want ZAPU to be placed in power and Nkomo to become prime minister. So it's really ZAPU that provides the infrastructure for dissidents and violence. If you liquidate ZAPU, if the word liquidation means bringing to an end something, then it means you have no problem of dissidents.
The 5th Brigade executed a vicious military campaign in Matabeleland and the Midlands under the guise of a security operation.
Well, it is a queer security operation. When the military gather people together and start singing political songs, ZANU-PF songs, and they start denouncing me and denouncing ZAPU. What type of security operation is that one?
Thousands of innocent civilians were massacred. The political leaders were imprisoned, among them Edward Ndlovu, ZAPU MP for Gwanda.